So today we have to talk about the natural killer cells, okay? And the format of the class is the same, that you have to attempt a quiz after the class, okay? That means that you should remain attentive throughout the class. So previously we were discussing macrophages and other cells. In this lecture we are going to discuss about the natural killer cells. I had already told you about the natural killer cells, that they naturally are equipped with this capability to kill the infected cells in our bodies. So basically there are three lymphocytes in the blood, or three lymphocytes in the circulation. These are the T cells, B cells of the adaptive immune system, which are there in the blood, and these are the natural killer cells of the innate immune system. Okay, so how many? There are three lymphocytes that are circulating in the blood. When you talk about the T and B cells of the adaptive immune system, they proliferate and differentiate in a week time. Okay, when there is infection, the B and T cells, they would take about a week to be activated, to proliferate and differentiate and become effector cells. Effector cells, B effector cells would be the plasma cells that are secreting antibodies, for instance. Similarly, the T cells would also become effector cells in a week time. But the natural killer cells, these are lymphocytes of the innate immune system, and they respond quickly to infections, cancer, and stress. If there is cancer in the body, the cell has turned cancerous, for instance. There are certain stress factors that can also invite the natural killer cells. The natural killer cells can just kill those particular cells. Or if there is infection, there is a bacteria or there is a virus that has infected a cell, then in those cases, the natural killer cells, they respond very quickly. They don't need a week time as is needed in the case of T and B cells of the adaptive immune response. That's why the innate immune response is very rapid and very quick. Okay? So the natural killer cells and the adaptive immune cells, like the T cells and the natural killer cells are similar, in function and in makeup as well. If you look at them, the function of the natural killer cells in innate immunity is the same as the function of the T cells in adaptive immunity. Okay? So, and if the functions are the same, it indicates that the molecules expressed on the surfaces of these cells would also be similar. This is understandable. The receptors are, expressed on the surfaces of T cells and the natural killer cells. There would be a great deal of similarity. Similar receptors would be expressed on these cells. That's why their function is similar to each other. One is just playing its role in innate immunity, and the other one is playing its role in adaptive immunity. But still, there are some peptides that can differentiate or tell the natural killer cells from the T cells. Okay? For instance, the natural killer cells can be distinguished from the T cells via these markers. CD56, which should be there on the natural killer cells. But this marker, and along with other lots of different markers, also present on T cells. okay? But with no CD3. CD3 is the specific markers for T cells. It is specifically present on T cells, but not on natural killer cells. So this marker can differentiate between the T cells and the natural killer cells. Or this, CD3 molecules expressed on the surface of T cells can tell you that this is T cells if it is CD3 positive. If it is CD3 negative and CD56 positive, it is a natural killer cell. In the blood, there are lots of natural killer cells in the blood. About 5 to 25% of the total circulating lymphocytes are the natural killer cells inside your blood. And how the natural killer cells respond in these situations, what are the situations? Infection, cancer, or stress. These are the situations where the natural killer cells are needed to play their role, okay? So the natural killer cells would respond to these situations in two different ways. The first way, the red arrow that you see here, is killing of the infected cell. The natural killer cell can kill the infected cell. And the second, you see the blue arrow here, the second function of the natural killer cells is secretion of the cytokines. So it can either directly kill a cell or it can secrete cytokines. By secretion of cytokines, what would the natural killer cell actually do? The natural killer cell would influence the macrophages that are in the surrounding. Where there is infections, there are macrophages there. So the natural killer cell would influence the macrophages and enhance inflammation, because macrophages are the cell responsible for enhancing or initiating this process of inflammation. So what would the natural killer cell do? They would secrete cytokines that would influence or trigger macrophages to be more active with this process of inflammation, to secrete more pro-inflammatory molecules and enhance this process of inflammation and phagocytosis of pathogens. So the macrophages would become very active, and because of the secretion of cytokines by the natural killer cells. Okay? So there are two ways that the natural killer cells can respond: killing of the infected cell directly, or secretion of the cytokines to make other cells be activated and secrete different kind of products, or do their jobs just like phagocytosis, etc., to enhance the process of inflammation. So in this way, the natural killer cells, they are dealing with two types of pathogens, extracellular pathogens and the intracellular pathogens. The extracellular pathogens are bacteria. The intracellular pathogens are viruses. Okay? So it means that the natural killer cells can help with elimination of both the bacteria and viruses. Okay? They are helping with the clearance of bacteria and viruses from our bodies. And what happens if some people are lacking in the natural killer cells? If they do not have a natural killer cells, we call such people immunodeficient. They are immunodeficient in natural killer cells. And what is what would happen to these people if they are immunodeficient for the natural killer cells? They would experience persistent viral infections. Their immune system, the innate immune system, because natural killer cells are a vital part of the innate immune system, and they respond very quickly to infections, particularly viral infections that we are talking about here. So if you do not have the natural killer cells, it means your innate immune system would not work against the viruses. Okay? And the viruses would be free to propagate inside the cells because the quick response is lacking. Natural killer cells are not there. Adaptive immune system would be working after a week time, you know? The T and B cells would take a week to proliferate and differentiate. So you have viruses that are free to propagate inside the bodies for a week. Okay? So in such people, the adaptive immune system usually is not very active or not very efficient enough to clear viral infections. That's why such people are prone to viral infections, particularly herpes viral infection, herpes viruses. You would have heard different herpes viral infections, about different, herpes viral infections. So such people need, a very rigorous protocol of antivirals for treatment of viral diseases. Okay, that's how did people come to know about the natural killer cells, that they're so important for clearance of the viral, infections. People came to know about it when they studied certain individuals who had this immunodeficiency. And in those people, the scientists, they discovered that these people are not able to clear the viruses because they do not have the natural killer cells. Now there are two populations of the natural killer cells inside our bodies. The natural killer cells are found almost everywhere in the body. They are in the blood, they are in the tissues, and the natural killer cells are also found in the lymph. Okay? They help with cells of the adaptive immune system to, move out of the lymphatic system when they mature. So they are there in the blood, in the lymph, and in the tissues. But in the blood and tissues, there are two very distinct populations of the natural killer cells. One is known as the CD56 bright natural killer cells. They are found in the tissues. The other one is CD56 dim natural killer cells that are mainly found in the blood. 90% of the blood natural killer cells are CD56 dim. What is CD56? This is a specific marker expressed on the natural killer cells, as I told you somewhere here. And in case of some cells, more CD56 is expressed on the surface of these cells, while in others, the CD56 expression is low. Okay? So if it is lower expression, we call it CD56 dim. Okay? On natural killer cells, where not much of the CD56 molecule is expressed, they are cytotoxic in nature. Cytotoxic means that they are killers of other cells. Okay? They are killers of other cells. While those cells, natural killer cells, found inside the tissues with abundance of CD56 expressed on their surfaces, they are weakly cytotoxic. Okay? Their cytotoxic or killing capabilities are limited. That's why we call them weakly cytotoxic natural killer cells. And these natural killer cells found inside the tissues are more for cytokine productions. The bright cells are more for cytokine productions, while the dim cells, CD56 dim, are more for killing of other cells or cytotoxicity. Okay? How, if you look at the development of these cells, that how these cells are developed, the CD56 bright cells that are found in the tissues usually give rise to the CD56 dim cells. This differentiation would happen just like that, okay? That the CD56 bright are going to give rise to the CD56 dim cells. In blood, not all of the cells they are CD56 dim, but majority is CD56 dim. Okay? And some fraction or percentage of cells are CD56 bright. You understand?
Yes.
In lungs, there are 80% of the natural killer cells, they are CD56 bright. Okay? In uterus, uterine natural killer cells are 80% bright, and they do not kill, you know. The bright cells do not kill. They have other functions. For instance, in the uterine environment, they secrete different kind of growth factors, and they help with the formation of placenta and enlargement of the maternal spiral arteries leading to the placenta, because more, nutrition and more oxygen is needed there for the fetus. So the natural killer cells are playing quite a different role in different tissues. They are not always killing, the cells.